Hello and welcome back to Rosie's Preserving School and the start of the autumn season, which I think is probably, I think it's my favourite, to be honest. I don't know whether I was born in September, and I don't know whether you kind of your favourite season goes along with your birthday, but I just love the autumn. The temperature suits me. A little bit fresher air and all the sort of things that you can do with all of the foraging and everything else. And I think it's just a lovely kind of peaceful time of year. I know it's frantically busy, but it has the air of, I don't think there's any real big kind of social things to worry about. And you can just sort of potter about and do whatever you feel is necessary for your own life and preserving. In the break, as you can imagine, I've been fairly busy. I've been busy pressure canning things for the winter. Our lifestyle is very different now that we have a warehouse to take care of, and we're all working in a big old space that is bitterly cold in the winter. So I've been making lots and lots of soup in this break between the summer and the autumn, so that we've got it. It's all pressure can. I should take it to work. It will be on the shelf, and I've bought a small slow cooker, and in the morning we're going to put it in there so that we've got something hot to eat at lunchtime. The rest, when it's the weather is fine, we don't bother with lunch because we can work through. But I think in the winter it's important to keep up your energy levels so that you don't get too cold. A warehouse is a very cold place to be, let me tell you. I have an office, and it's sort of the warmest place to be, but I try not to sort of slink in there too much because it's unfair on everybody else who has to have to stay out in the cold. But so I've been doing that, and that's been my main focus, and keeping the garden up together. And of course now we're picking madly, runner beans, tomatoes, all that kind of thing, and all the fruits, and the apples are coming. We've been blackberrying, and there's just loads and loads to do. So before we kind of start, I just wanted to say, if you can pick some blackberries and elderberries, there are masses of elderberries this year. Just pick them and freeze them on a tea tray or a baking tray. You don't need really to do much to them. Just comb them off of the stalks that they grow where the flowers were earlier in the year. You can just comb them with a dinner fork and give them a quick rinse and put them on a tray. We're going to be using them in the last workshop of this season. So if you've got some frozen elderberries, that will be great. They won't last, they're all ready now, so they won't last till then, obviously fresh. So that, and also my elderberry cough linctus, which I think we made last year. I showed you how to make that. That's great for winter coughs and chesty coughs and things like that. If you can't find the recipe, have a look in my recipe site, and you'll find it there, and it's really superb at those tickly coughs that you can't get rid of. With blackberries, I've been blackberrying because, again, in that last workshop, we wanted blackberries, and I just find commercial blackberries are quite tasteless somehow. They're kind of big, like a lot of commercial fruit, like I've said about tomatoes and strawberries. They're all huge, but there's only a certain amount of flavor in anything like that, and it will spread out to fill up the flesh, but it won't make it taste any stronger just because it's big. In fact, I think it dilutes it somewhat. So what I've done is I've got a lovely, actually, big blackberry bush in our lane that goes down to the main road. So we've been popping out there every 2 or 3 days, and I've done some with some apple. I've water bathed it. The great thing about fruit is you can water bath it. You don't need to pressure can it. So I've done some blackberry and apple for crumbles in the winter, because Trev loves his pudding. and I just have a sort of little bit, and he's stick thin, so he can have more. But I also need blackberries for the last workshop. So instead of freezing them, I've just put them in a jar with nothing at all. I put no water, no sugar, and I've just water bath them for about 20 minutes. And we'll just get that on the other camera, on pan cam. And you can see the juices come out when they're water bathed. So you can probably just, it's all very black and shiny, isn't it? But believe me, there's juice in there. You can see there sort of sliding about up the top here. And they'll keep in the jar okay. And I've done a little jar as well because I filled the jar up, but I put the seal on and the top and water bath them for about 20 minutes. And I'll probably keep on doing that, but our apple tree hasn't, it's got apples, but they're not ripe yet. So I can't do any more sort of mixture until a bit later on. But all those fruits have been fabulous, which is odd because these sort of stone fruits and things like that, green gages and plums and everything, their blossom must come at just a different time. And I've eaten all the plums on our tree, and I think there were exactly 7. So we've got about 4 trees, and I had literally a handful of plums. So that was that for this year. But everything's got to have a rest. So, you know, I'm not too upset about it because there's plenty of other things to be doing. So if you can keep some elderberries and blackberries, you'll thank me later. Certainly you can't buy elderberries in the supermarket. You can buy dried elderberries online should you want to. I've used that for the cough linctus, so it's perfectly fine. So all is not lost. So I have some plums here. We're going to be making today plum jam with walnuts and brandy, which is a little bit of a diversion for what I normally like to do. And we've got to bear in mind, you know, the big C coming up at the end of the year, and it will be the perfect preserve to serve to guests, you know, on Christmas morning or something with some toast or croissant or something like that. Or it will make a superb hamper ingredient, or not ingredient, you know, something to put into hampers. I'm not going to make a huge amount. We've just got 450 grams of plums, whereas normally I would make a kilo of jam at a time, but because of the state of the plums, it's been a bit difficult to actually find some. So we've gone with 450 grams or a pound of plums. Now, I had to buy these at the weekend, and they're kind of a little bit riper than I would normally use for jam. And making this jam tonight, we're just going to recap a little bit. We did jam right back at the beginning, went through it quite thoroughly. And I think it's sometimes the specifics get a bit lost. So we're going to go through why we do things and how we do them. I think there's a question. Do I wash the fruit before I freeze it? It depends where I picked it. I try not to pick it near roads or dusty places or where there's lots of animals, but you know, it just take a view, because when you defrost it, it's going to have a lot of moisture, and you can give it a quick rinse before you use it and drain it well. If you keep on washing it all the time, it's getting more and more sort of squidgy really and broken down. So try to pick well, I would say, rather than doing a lot of washing. If you're going to wash things like blackberries, you need to put them in a bowl with some cold water. Don't use any heat. And I put about an egg cupful of vinegar in with them. Some people say salt because it draws out any bugs that get in between all the little crevices and everything. But if you use vinegar, it actually is more effective. It doesn't affect the flavour of the blackberries once they're being used. It's not enough to do that, but it's very efficient at drawing out all those bugs. I'd be more bothered about sort of getting leaves and bits of twig out and that kind of thing, especially with the elderberries. What I generally do with those is to pick them and then leave them be outside somewhere so that anything that's in there, they're great. They have lots of spiders in usually, elderberries. So within the clusters, it's a good place for spiders to hide from birds and things. So I leave them outside on a fine day and just let them crawl away. And then I actually do the combing of the branches, the clusters outside as well. And because if you don't want to be picking elderberries off your kitchen floor, because they inevitably go everywhere. And I've got two very agitated chickens around my feet who are just waiting for the elderberries to go all over the place. So happy days. I do all those sort of jobs outside if I can, like stringing beans and slicing them and everything, podding peas, and then any sort of accidents, you haven't got a lot of clearing up to do. And the second question, does it have to be 2-part lids? No, you can just use a twist-on lid for water bathing. It's just because I've got all those sorts of jars around me because of all the soup making. So that's why I did that. But no, you can just use an ordinary jar. And so any fruit like that, I try not to add too much water and syrup and things because so much comes out of the fruit. Because you have to think about how you're going to use it. What am I going to do with it? And then because we have a lot of crumbles, that's our thing. We don't make pies and things like that because it just takes too long. So the fruit produces enough liquid in the processing to just tip it in the dish and put the crumble topping on. If you want things that have got lots of liquid, then make a simple syrup, sugar and water, equal parts, and do it in that. It depends what I'm doing. Things like apricots, peaches, I would do that. But for things like apples and plums and things that have got their own juices, I think you get a much better flavour because it's more concentrated. Anyway, I can talk a lot about all those sorts of things while this is cooking. It doesn't matter which sort of plum you use. It's better to have them slightly on the firm side. I'm a bit worried that these aren't going to set, but anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I had to buy them at the weekend and they have ripened a bit more than I would normally have. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can cut them in half and take the stone out, job done. But usually if you're cooking them and they are slightly underripe or they're still quite firm, you lose too much fruit. You leave too much fruit on the stone. So I'm going to show you what I do because normally speaking, that's what I would be doing. Although I think these are probably okay to stone as they are. What I will do though is just cut all around so that they don't take too long to get through the skin. So I'm going to put them in and I'm going to count them. So just cut round to release that a bit. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. And normally when we're making jam, we're driving off the moisture. We do not want to add moisture because it just takes so long to get the jam to set. So normally with anything other than stone fruit, I would just cook the fruit very, very gently to start with till the juices start to run, and then increase the heat up a bit. But with stone fruit like this, green gages, apricots, that kind of thing, you're in danger of it burning onto the pan before you've even started. So you put about a teacupful of water just to stop it sticking, and that small amount will cook off very quickly and will not materially affect it in the long run. So even if you've got a pan significantly more full than this with plums, although you wouldn't really have it above a third full anyway, because of allowing it to develop the rolling boil, still only put about a teacupful, because the plums at the bottom will soften quicker than the ones that are leaning on them on the top, but then you can stir it and change them around. You don't want to be sort of seeing them all floating about in a pan full of water. You you won't get anywhere like that. So I've got the heat on. I've put the hob on, you'll be pleased to know. And while they're starting to heat up, I'm going to add the lemon juice. I'm going to squeeze the lemons. Let's get the paperwork in the right order. There we are. So I've got 2 lemons because they're very tiny actually, but if the lemon is bigger, then just go with 1 for this amount of fruit. Most important, write down the number of plums that you had, that you counted, because if you don't, you'll be standing there thinking, what was it? You know what it's like. You have hundreds of things in your head at the same time and you can't accurately remember, and it is quite important that you do. So I'm going to cut these tiny lemons in half and squeeze them. Now we know with jam you need some important elements to be present, and as I've said before, it's more like a chemical experiment than cooking. So you need pectin, which is in the fruit. Now my pectin in my fruit would have diminished because they've ripened, which is not ideal. It has the most pectin just as the fruit is ready to be picked. So that's why you should have some very slightly underripe fruit and fruit that has been picked recently and has not been standing around diminishing, the pectin levels diminishing. So I haven't got any of those tonight. Anyway, so you need pectin. If you have fruit that doesn't have enough pectin in it, which you will learn by experience over time, some fruits like blueberries and cherries just don't have very much pectin, then you can help it with either adding pectin to the jam or using a jam sugar that's already got it added in, just to give yourself a fighting chance. The jam that sets keeps very much better. You keep at ambient temperature with no problem at all for, well, years really, but so we've got pectin with the right fruit. We've got acid from our lemon juice, which I'm going to put in now. Doesn't really, it's not critical how much lemon juice you have. So that's why I put 2 small lemons. It's not going to affect the flavor, but it will affect set if you haven't got enough. And if you're a beginner then at making jam, then always put the lemon in. And as you get more experience, you'll come across recipes that don't include lemon juice, And that's because the fruit has enough acid in the first place, as a rule. So that's all we need in there at the moment. Let me get some, oh, I've got a cloth here. I've got my sugar weighed out. That's the other thing we need. And don't mess about with the amounts of sugar in recipes. To make decent traditional jam, you need equal sugar to fruit. So we've got 450 grams or 1 pound of plums, and we'll need 450 grams or 1 pound of white granulated sugar or unrefined granulated sugar. But don't try and use any of the other kinds of sugars because they aren't made for the job. The brown sugars come into their own in chutneys and things like that because they bring flavour, because they've had things added to them like molasses and things like that, which we don't really want in our plum jam. It doesn't go well with it. So you can see that the colour is starting to come out of the plums. They're starting to open up where I cut them. I don't know, yes, you can see. And they will start to soften. I'm just going to keep moving them about a little bit because we don't want them burning onto the pan. And stone fruit seems to be hell-bent on sticking itself to the pan and then burning. So you have to be really careful and keep an eye on it. Don't really plan on doing anything else at all while you're doing this. So we'll let that soften. While that's softening, we can prepare our walnuts. So we need 75 grams or 3 ounces of walnuts. Right, I'm just going to take my sugar off. I'll use one of these little bowls to weigh it in. If you weren't here watching me, I wouldn't be weighing it. I'd just be doing this sort of handful, but I'll do the 75 grams. Of the cave. You don't put those into the jam at this stage, but while we're waiting for the fruit to soften, it's a good thing to be doing the rest of this prep. So I've got a fairly big knife and I've spread them out on my board, and I've got the end of the knife there, my hand on it, fingers out of the way, and I just go across. I mean, you still want it to have a bit of crunch. You don't want them so fine that they're like dust, you know, you just want them a bit smaller. I never buy whole walnuts or the walnut halves. I always end up buying the bags of broken ones anyway. And I mainly use it in granola and chocolate brownies, of course. But you can, you know, I suppose you could substitute hazelnuts if you wanted to. But hand chopping them like this just keeps them, I think, at the right sort of size. If you, by the time you put them into a machine and switched it on, they are too fine. Just be careful if you are giving these as a gift, or even serving it to visitors, like I said, on a sort of Christmas morning, to make sure that people know there are nuts in the jam, because, you know, you have to be really careful to make sure, because of allergies and so on. So we've got our fruit and we're assuming it's at the right stage of ripeness. We've got our acid and we've got our sugar. So those are three of the things. And the fourth thing is heat, of course. And once we put the sugar in and dissolved it, we will be increasing the heat. We'll be stopping stirring because that reduces it again. And if you stand there constantly stirring, once you've got the sugar dissolved, all you'll be doing is evaporating like this with steam, the kind of moisture of the jam, and it will become very sort of gluey. It won't be set. What you need to do is to increase the heat and get the sugar to invert, as that's what happens chemically, and that reacts with the sugar, the acid in the fruit and the pectin to make the set. So that's what you're aiming for, not to just keep on cooking it until it's thick enough to spread. Because if it's thick enough to spread when it's boiling hot, it will be solid by the time it's cold. So that's not what we're aiming for. And you have to, you know, put your brave pants on and increase the heat and hold your nerve when it's all bubbling away like mad. These are going to take a few minutes to break down. Give them a bit of a bash to give them a bit of a helping hand. You can make this kind of thing with other stone fruits if you're lucky enough to find green gages. If you are, you're probably in France. We seem to have grubbed out all of our green gage trees. I've actually planted 3 this year because I know I probably won't get much fruit from them for 4 or 5 years, but they're such a delicious stone fruit. But we just, I don't know, no, that's got to come out, get rid of that. So it's a bit of a shame, really. So we're not at the point where you're going to need jars, but you need to wash your jars and rinse them and put them into a warm oven just to bring their temperature up. I'm not so fussed about all the sterilising aspect of it. I don't think any of us are preparing our preserves in the sort of arena where these rules stemmed from, when people had sort of earth floors in their kitchen and, kind of animals in there and all sorts. We all live in fairly hygienic circumstances. We're not using jars that have been kept in the shed most of the year with nails in or anything like that. We're using good quality containers, and we're doing it in the proper way. And so don't get too stressed about all this sterilizing. Jars that go into a factory to be filled go straight from the manufacturer on their pallet, just as we have in our warehouse. It's the same jar packed in the same way, nothing is done to it. They open it in the factory, the jars are fed onto the production line, they get filled and they get vacuum sealed because the contents may or may not be hot. So they have machinery as it goes through on the production line that actually sucks the air out of the jam or whatever it is, pasta sauce or mayonnaise. It will suck the air out and that will seal the jar lid and keep the contents safe. So they don't sterilize anything. If you're lucky, they might blow some compressed air into it as it goes onto the production line, but there isn't all this heating and washing and that we get sort of so hung up about. It's nice to do it for your own peace of mind, but don't stress about it. Don't you think, oh, I didn't quite do that hot enough, or I don't know how hot to do it. The most important thing, as I'm always saying, is that the jar is dry. I'd rather you just use the jar without washing it and it was dry than washing and then using it still wet. We're removing moisture because that is what we need to do to keep food safe in storage at ambient temperature. You need to lower the moisture content. because it's the moisture that yeast and molds thrive on. Now, we've done a lot of work on yeast and molds, and the yeasts in the air, making the bread, you know, they're all there. They're in the air, they're in everything. So if they're going to grow and proliferate in a preserve, you need to keep the sugar content to the right level, and you need to reduce the moisture. It doesn't have to be reduced, like I said, cooking it till it's like glue. It just needs to be reduced a bit, and then it will be safe. And so putting things into a wet jar is adding that moisture right back in there, which is not what we need to do. Now, this fruit, if we can look at, get pan cam on again. Yes, thank you. Is cooked down quite a bit, but it's still got some big lumps, which I think is quite nice to keep some fruit as whole as you can manage. And as it cooks with the sugar, it will reduce a little bit more, soften a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is what you should do, but I never do normally, is to take the pan off the heat and add your sugar. Now, I didn't mention about the pan. We're just regrouping over all the things that we've learnt along the way. The pans that we use are shaped like this to allow as much moisture to escape in this part of the process as quickly as possible, because the pan is shaped like a funnel, and all the moist air can escape quite easily. You can use a big pan that you already have. You don't have to have a jam pan, but make sure it's got straight sides and not sides that come in like a stock pot, because that will keep the moisture in, which it's supposed to do if you're making stock. So with the sugar, you can just add it in. You don't have to dribble it in all kind of 10 grains at a time. Just pop it all in and stir as much in as you can. It won't all dissolve off of the heat, but get a lot of that done. And as I always say, you can hear it and you can feel it. When you're stirring it, you can feel it all gritty and you can hear it if I stop talking. Or indeed coughing. So that's all the gritty sugar. Put it back onto the heat and the sugar will melt. And you can stir it at this stage while it's doing that if you want to. I'm just going to read a question so that I can answer that. Oh, Tracy, you've got lots of green gauges. That's my favourite fruit. I love them. My father had a greengrocer's shop, and in the heat of the summer, I had to work there in the summer holidays. And he would go off somewhere delivering things or fetching or whatever. And I'd be stood in the shop and you could hear the green gauges splitting their skins in the heat, which was lovely for me because I just ate the ones that were split. So no, don't put the lids in the oven. No. No, I don't even wash the lids. I think the heat of the jam, once the jam is in the jar, the heat of the jar and the jam and everything, again, this stemmed from the time when people use lids for all sorts of things, and it's just, I think you're going to ruin the seal inside, the PVA seal, and make it difficult for it to do its job. So unless it's obviously dirty, then when you could give it a quick rinse, but then you've got the problem of drying it, and you don't want to be putting them in the oven because you will certainly destroy the seal doing that. Can you toast the nuts to extract more flavour? You can, if you are the sort of person that can toast them. efficiently. I'm the sort of person that thinks, oh, I must just, and then I come back and they're burnt. So I don't, but you can, and it will give a different flavour for sure. I'm just going to give this a stir because we don't want it burning. Now I have this very obvious blue plate here, and what I'm going to do is I've got a metal spoon and I'm going to start taking my stones out, because once it starts cooking, the stones come away really easily without leaving any flesh on them. So that's a very easy way, especially if you're doing something like chutney, when perhaps you'll have upwards of 50 or 60 stones or plums that you're preparing. I find it much easier to let them start cooking, and then while you're waiting for the chutney, you can have 2 or 3 little sessions of just finding the stones. And that's why it's important to write down how many you had in the first place. But with 15, it's not too much of a bother. It doesn't matter, you can leave them to the end, because this is now, I can't feel the sugar or I can't hear it either. It's all nice and smooth. So what I'm going to do is stop stirring, because we need the rolling boil. And the rolling boil, if I get the spoon out of the way, is the vigorous bubbling across the whole of the surface. And once you've achieved that, you want to start timing. Now, I do it for 6 minutes, and the recipe says 6 minutes. But with stone fruit, sometimes it will take a little bit longer. So you might have 2 or 3 goes at sort of getting it to set. So don't worry about the foam, that comes from the sugar. And we can stir that at the end. You can put knobs of butter in and things, but I don't teach that, because if people go on ultimately to sell their preserves, then things like that need to come back out again, unless you want to put on there that's got an allergen in there, which is dairy. So try to get used to manipulating your preserves without relying on those kinds of things. So this is sort of the rolling boil. Well, it's not sort of the rolling boil, it's the rolling boil, where you can't really see the fruit. All you can see is bubbles. And you need to really observe the bubbles, the colour, how fast they are, how big they are, because they do change. I'm going to put my timer on, which I've got set for 6 minutes. And the foam is all around the edge. And after about a couple of minutes, I will give it a stir, because I don't want it to stick. I've got the heat on 4 out of a possible 6. So normally with things like raspberry, I would have it on 6, but I'm not going to risk it with the plum, because they do catch so easily. How many stones did I find? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've got 8 to find when we get there. But they'll be obvious in the before we jar up. You'll be able to see it quite easily. So I'm not fussed about that at the moment. I'm much more concentrating on getting the right conditions for the set. Now the bubbles are already slower and sort of fatter. They stop sort of being all frantic and small. They join together and make much bigger bubbles, and are slowed down a bit because of it, and because it's thickening with the gelling of the liquid part of the jam. The changes are minute, I would say, but you do get used to it. The more you make, the more it will be. You don't even need to kind of really test it for a set. You just know it will set by the look of it. Right, I'm going to give it a stir. I'm not going to go mad. I'm just doing a figure of 8. Just to check there's nothing going on. So untoward. And that it gets everything all excited again and bubbles around. Now I've got other spices on the table here, which I generally group together in my head as winter spices. So if you wanted to put other flavors in, you could do a little spice bag and cook it with the fruit and leave it in there until the end and then take it out. Things like allspice, whole allspice berries, a little stick of cinnamon, some star anise, those kinds of things, the food cloves. You could just put those in, and you can just by me reading those names out, you can sort of think, oh yes, that would taste lovely. It depends. Some people would think it was horrendous. They can't stand cloves or things like that. So don't, but this is the point in your kind of learning where you can start thinking, oh yes, I can put those in, and you can imagine what it will do to the flavor. And if you think that is something that you would like, then you can go ahead and do it. There aren't any real rules. Things like spices and things like that are flavorings. They're not deal breakers as to whether the jam sets or not. Where are we doing? 2:40, 2 minutes 40. I'll give it another check. No more questions. That's good. So all these mysterious things like rolling boils and so on aren't, they're not really mysterious at all. They're just, it's like saying you need to saute something, or, it's just the expression of a technique, really. And this is the same for any jam. It doesn't make me laugh, and I do understand it, but really all you need is a book saying how to make jam, and then you can make all the jams that are listed in the book. You don't need to have it all set out as a recipe. If it's really learning this chemistry experiment thoroughly, and then you'll have the confidence to make any jam, really. And you certainly don't need a thermometer to see that is blisteringly hot. So I don't use a thermometer. I've never used a thermometer because I've never found one that was good enough quality for long-term use. They all look fine in kits and in their packets in homeware stores, but the trouble is that if you can find one where it's etched into the metal, then you've got a fighting chance. But all of the ones on sale these days have a transfer print on them, and it depends where it is against the thermometer as to what the temperature is. I mean, it's no indication really. It's not accurate enough. And you could use a digital thermometer, but I just by now I haven't needed to. But if they'd been around when I was younger, I probably would have done. But and then after you've used those types of thermometers, the printed kind, 2 or 3 times, they start to rub off or wash off, so you sort of think, well, what's the point? Right, that's my time. I'm going to take it off the heat so that it doesn't keep cooking. And we're going to give it a stir. I've got my saucer here. I don't use a cold from the fridge or freezer saucer. because it can create condensation when you put the hot jam onto it, and that puts moisture into it. You're trying to see if it will set when it's in the jar. That's the point of doing the set test. So if you've already mixed some water back into it, it isn't going to give you a true indication. I'm just going to take some of the jam in a little puddle and I'm going to pass it over to be put into the fridge now. I don't put it in the freezer either because I don't want my saucer to break. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to find my other stones. I'm going to switch the heat off because I don't think we'll need to cook it anymore, but you never know. I can switch it back on, but I don't want the hob heating the whole kitchen. So I'm just going to lay that on there for the moment. So we know we've got 7. If I'm doing a big chutney or something that's got a lot, I'll have a much bigger plate, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I will put them in 10s so I don't have to keep on counting them basically. So that's 7, that's 8. Try not to get too much jam with them. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, one more. And with a big chutney, there's always one you can't find, and it takes you about 20 minutes. But if you use a metal spoon, I find it cuts through the jam better, or the chutney, and also the stone knocks against it and you can feel it. It's somewhere around here. It's not exactly watching paint dry, this, but it's close. Right, I think that's 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's it, 15. And there's nothing worse than, you know, somebody breaking a tooth or something if they don't realize there's a stone in there. So that's why I do it, to make sure, especially in the days when I was selling jam and so on, because I just didn't want somebody turning up with a big dental bill to hoist onto me. So now the foam, as we've talked about before, if you vigorously stir the jam, it generally will disperse back into the jam. If you're fond of entering competitions with your jam, probably it's better to get it all corralled to what the side of the pan, let it stay on the jam because it will cook with the heat of the jam. And then again, using a metal spoon, you can just skim it off without taking too much of the jam with it. But I'm not entering into a competition and I couldn't care less about anything in there. So we've got to look at the jam, see how that's getting on, and just get it out of the fridge. So here we are on our saucer. Get a flattish saucer if you can. And then what we're again doing, we're trying to see if what's in the pan, once it's cool and cold, will set. So that's why you put it onto a cold surface like this. You're cooling it down. You can start to see just by looking at it that has a very proud surface. a lot of surface tension, and it's not run in a very liquid way all over the saucer, which is a good sign. So then to test it, you use your little finger and you hold it out like you're having a posh cup of tea, and you use it to push the jam away from you. And you've only got one go at this per test, okay? So you push it, and if it's crinkling up, this is still quite warm, and you can see as you lift it, it is sort of it is beginning to set. The crinkle is your indicator. So you're good to go once it crinkles. You don't need to just put the jam on the saucer and put it in the fridge. If you start tipping it around, that surface tension, that kind of look of the jam will be lost. You're trying to do this to give yourself a fighting chance to have a set jam. So just put it on there, leave it alone. When you're going to test it, do it once. If you're not sure, you need to put it back on the heat, perhaps for a little bit longer, get it back up to the rolling boil again. If it's very runny and doesn't look, excuse me, as though it's got hope in hell of setting, then add the juice of another half a lemon, depending on the quantity of jam you've got in the pan. So that we're okay with that. So we're going to put the walnuts in now. Get those in. Stir them in. Now you can put less, or I doubt that you'd want more, but you can put a few less if you want to. It's just to give a real texture to the jam. So I've got my jar here, or jars, and I've got my jam funnel. If you haven't got a jam funnel, get one. If you're going to make a lot of jam, it will save you a lot of time and a lot of sticky jars. You know, as I've said before, if you spill it onto the outside of the jar, somehow, even if you wash it, even if you put it in a bowl of soapy water while it's still hot and wash it, it will still be there. It goes into the little dimples, the little pores of the glass, and every time it comes near any moisture, it will get sticky again. So save yourself the problem and get a funnel, or put your jam into a jug so that you can accurately pour it. Excuse me, I'm just gonna. So first thing we need to do is put our brandy in. And you don't want to put too much. You need about a teaspoonful per jar. You start sort of sloshing it in. I'm trying to find a teaspoon I can use. If you start pouring in too much, it will affect the set. And the reason you put it into the jar is so that it stays in the jam. If I poured it into there, it would all evaporate off before it got anywhere near the jar. So whether you're doing marmalade with whiskey or things like that, put it into the jar. So I'm going to put about a teaspoonful into there. And then as soon as I pour in the jam, it will rise up through the heat of the jam and stay in there when you put the lid on. So you need to fill the jar right to the top. And how you know it's at the top is by looking down into the funnel, and you can see the jam there. And when you take the funnel out, the bit that where the funnel has been, the jam will fill, and it will be right at the top like that. And that's where it needs to be. Put that over there for a moment, and you put your lid on to keep the brandy in. And then as the jam cools, it will shrink, because everything that is hot is bigger than it will be when it's cold. So the jam will shrink away from the top and it will leave a gap, but that gap has no air in it because we didn't leave any air in it. We put the lid on. We filled to the top, we put the lid on. The jam in the jar will be in contact with the lid, but it will shrink away. That will leave a vacuum at the top, which will keep your jam perfectly safe for years, just left on the shelf. You don't need to refrigerate it, and you shouldn't need to refrigerate it if you've made it with the correct amount of sugar to fruit and the acid and set it properly. You shouldn't need to refrigerate it ever. And by not refrigerating it, you will get the full flavour of that jam when you use it, because cooling it, not freezing it, but keeping it refrigerated will affect the flavour that you experience when you eat it. The lid may or may not pop, as people call it. It might go slightly concave. When it's completely cold, you might be able to tap it and hear a bit of a different sound. Don't worry about it. If it doesn't do any of those things, it will still be perfectly safe. I was brought up on cellophane covers and wax discs, not nice metal lids that sealed it under vacuum that we've created by filling the jar in the proper way. And those cellophane covers and the wax discs, you don't need wax discs with these sorts of lids. They create a place where condensation and moisture can lurk underneath and may introduce mold. You don't want bits of paper in the top. They were there with the cellophane to help create a barrier, because the cellophane is porous. And at the times they were used, people didn't live in centrally heated homes and all lovely and warm. They lived in a house probably with one fire in the sitting room and everywhere else was freezing. And so moisture, everything was damp, cupboards were damp and that kind of thing. And you put the jam away, all sealed up with its cellophane cover, which would all ping as the jam cooled. It would shrink and give that sort of drum-like top. But it was porous, and so if there was damp in the air, it would go back into the jam and create mold on the surface because it had introduced moisture again. If you've sealed them properly and you've made it properly, you shouldn't have any issues at all. So please don't fret if you don't think your jar. I mean, at the moment on the internet, it's driving me crazy. I can't look at a lot of the Facebook groups and things. People are turning the jars upside down. They're doing all sorts of rituals, that just don't have any effect whatsoever. If you do it properly, but nobody seems to be able to decide what properly is. They're all leading themselves astray with all of these sort of theories that have no scientific basis whatsoever. And people who are learning, if they don't give up at the first attempt, become so insecure making their jam that they don't enjoy it at all. They're absolutely fretting the whole time. Now, I don't know that this is going to, brandy, I'm not sure if this is going to fill the jar, but we should eat it first. So that's the thing. If you've got a part jar, just use it up first. Whoops, that's too much, but never mind. Put the top on. So it seems like there's a lot to remember, but actually it's like learning to drive. If you learn the right way the first time, you don't have kind of constant mistakes and you have confidence and success. And that's all any of us are sort of aiming for, really. We're not trying to sort of be the best or the whatever. You just want to do it properly, and then you won't find that you have an issue. Or if you do have an issue, you can unpick what you've done and you can decide what you don't need to do next time, or that you do need to do next time. You know, it can be all sorts of issues, but as long as you stick to the sort of things that I've indicated, you should be okay. It's not much below the top, but we'll certainly eat it first. Should be right to the top. I mean, best thing is when you're making jam is to have several sizes of jars available so that you can kind of think, oh, well, that's not going to fill a whole jar. So I'll put it in a part jar, put it in a smaller jar, and then it will fill it. But you'll collect and get a whole range of jars to choose from as time goes on. So of course, plums are just good for jam. They're good for chutney. You can make sauce with them. You can make fruit leather. You can bottle them. I've got some boozy plums here, which are in, I can't remember what booze they're in. They're probably amaretto because that's my favourite. So you can bottle them in a syrup with some amaretto or brandy or whatever you like in it. This is the dams and cheese I made last year, which is very solid. That what I was talking about, it all becoming gluey. Sometimes that's what you want to make a damson cheese that you can turn out onto a plate or cheese board and slice it, and actually have a slice of the fruit cheese with actual cheese. And damsons are great for that. I mean, they're another stone fruit, but my goodness, do they have some stones? I mean, they're tiny fruit. And if you do anything else with them, apart from making jelly or butter, it's a thankless task, really, in my view. Life's too short. But they do have a very good flavour. Plums are very, very good in the dehydrator to make plum leather, because the dehydrating of them enhances the sugar content, the natural sugar content. You don't want to add sugar to fruit leathers because it makes it hygroscopic, and again, it will always be sticky. So the natural fruits that are enhanced by dehydrating, by taking the water out, make it the ideal thing to make fruit leather with. And there's no little pips like strawberries and things, seeds to worry about. All kinds of things. We'll be making another plum-based preserve in the Christmas season, so that we're not done with plums yet, but that's just an idea for something a little bit different. Okay, I will leave you there. I will see you next week when we'll be looking at apples, and we'll be making herb jellies. Now, I know the herbs aren't at their best now, but there are apples around, and when the herbs are really in tip-top condition, then the apples aren't there. So it's a bit of a last-ditch stand of the season is to make some herb jellies ready for the winter. So I'll see you next week. Thank you.